My name's Tom Miller. I serve as a swine field specialist down in southeast Iowa. And one of the ag engineers I work with, he always says when we're doing manure class, he says, well, an old extension guy I worked with, if he was late getting into the office, he says, well, I'll make up for it by leaving early today. So we're going to start just maybe a minute or two early, so maybe we get done a minute or two. But since we aren't pushed for time or anything on this room, we can use it and William and Colin both have agreed they'll stay for as long as you have questions. So our first speaker today is Colin Johnson. Mr. Johnson received his Bachelor of Science degree from Northwest Missouri State University in '99. He then proceeded to Iowa State University to complete his Master's in Animal Science in 2002. Colin's expertise is in animal welfare assessment or auditing, housing and ventilation, county fair derby programs, air quality, pork quality, production management software, record systems, and pork quality assurance. Colin will discuss options to help young farmers develop skills to manage finances, legal issues, management, technical production, sustainability, and much more. So let's give a warm welcome to Colin Johnson.
Well, if we covered all of those things we just mentioned, you won't be out of here till spring, I don't think. But I want to take most of the day just talk about really some of the areas of the industry that we can get into as young people or beginning people in the industry and break them out a little bit. We're not going to go very deep. Can't spend a lot of time in some cash flow. Would love to do that, and I'll offer that to you as a resource afterward. Definitely take my email down. And I can get you these slides as well sent to you since we didn't prepare them today. But we'll walk through some things. We'll have plenty of time for some questions. And I do a lot of work with beginning producers, a lot of contract considerations for contract production and cash flow on lots of different considerations. Work a lot with the Coalition to Support Iowa's Farmers, who's going to be a good resource for you if you're looking at getting into the industry as well, and a lot of the commodity groups. So. We'll roll there. I work within the Pork Industry Center, which is really the swine extension hub at Iowa State University. So we really want to put a little plug out for that. I'm based in South Central Iowa, where I'm there. And I also farm, so I come to you with that perspective as well as having, my bank account and my operating loan being negative at times and go back and forth. So we've been in the farming business myself. But why pork production in Iowa? I mean, obviously, we know Iowa is known as a tall corn state. We're known as a pig state, and we have a lot of assets out there. And if pork production is going to happen anywhere in the country, anywhere in the world, I spent time working in swine systems in Europe for a year and have been back and forth over there as well. And different regions have different assets, but Iowa has got a lot of them put together all in one place with our fertile ground, the grain production we have here, the soil that needs nutrients coming back to it from manure. We have a history of a lot of packing capacity and even more of it coming to us, and plenty of shackle space coming at us here in Iowa and in the upper Midwest. So what a great place to be, and in so many different ways to be in pork production. So I've thrown up here on this slide several of those opportunities we're going to consider today, whether that's in commodity production or niche production, and we'll define those two a little bit differently. Granted, we're all going to be raising pork, but they're destined for a little bit of a different channel, and the production characteristics and business strategies of those two things are a little bit differently too. So within production, then we've got different phases of production that we can break out as far as what type of farm you want to be, what type of skill set you want to carry, and how economically diverse you want to be, because wean to finish or feeder to finish isn't nearly as dynamic from both a management nor from a financial standpoint of investment as what, say, a breed to finish, or even if you were an integrator that took it from breed or even from boar stud and reproduction clear to to the plate of the consumer. So many entities and people and dollars are tied up in all of that consideration. So contract grower or custom finishing, custom growing, contract farrowing, whatever it might be, is a term that's been around for the past 30 years and has really grown as a really easy, simplified strategy from both an ownership and a separation standpoint there and a risk standpoint to get started or to just simply be involved in the industry in a lot of ways, especially when our primary business and income in Iowa is driven off the land and corn and soybean production. The contract fit is a really good fit in a lot of places. Say when you own an 80 or 160 or 180 and put a building up on a section of ground. We'll talk about a little bit of that. Sow co-ops are a strategy, and other cooperatives where we would own a sharehold of a larger sow system elsewhere, maybe in Iowa, most likely outside of the state from a biosecurity standpoint, and bring shares of those pigs that you would own back into your system. Talk about the integrator. Now, the set of job descriptions on your right-hand side is something we certainly want to focus on. You can go upstairs to all of our businesses, whether it's in pharmaceuticals and nutrition and genetics and legal aspects, environmental services. There's a whole list of them I put up on there and could grow this list to 10 times what it is of the support that goes into the business of producing pigs and putting pork out here for the world to consume. And those jobs are very, very important. Don't say you're not a pig farmer at heart and you want a job in this industry. There's plenty of those things. I would direct somebody very easily to a lot of these allied business things as an opportunity to be involved in the industry. Well over half of these men and women upstairs working for a company would say they're a farmer at heart. And some of them are part-time farmers or full-time and then do a little work in a sales or in a service sector for us. So really, I like to, when I visit with young people or folks looking to get into any industry or business, is what do you really want to do? Not necessarily type of production, but what are your skills? What are the talents that you've been given? What interests you? And I describe myself a lot of times as I have a biological mind, so I know how things grow. I can take the nutrients out of the soil and a seed and put that into grain, and so I know how that process goes. But from a mechanical standpoint, I drive a tractor almost every day, but to tell you how to work on it, fix it, and I can do the maintenance. But so I'm not a mechanical mind. I'm not an engineering mind. So those are the things that help me also classify, considerations for your jobs and traits that you want to go forward. So I want to break down some of the interesting pieces to consider for you if you want to look into farrowing, breed to finishing. What are the important facts to know? And what are the points you need to be successful at in these regards to these phases? So farrowing, and we're going to look at it from an Iowa perspective. Okay, obviously in Iowa, we have a large shortage of wean pigs. We only have 1/6 of the sows in the whole country, yet we're finishing 1/3 of the finishing pigs in the state. And two reasons why that regards. Number one is simply from a biosecurity standpoint, the population of pigs that we have in some pockets of the state. It's easier for us to get the sows elsewhere into non-pig dense parts of the country. And so we've sent a lot of that sow production to perimeter states, to other regions that can specialize in that and get a lot of that. And the manure values, the manure content from some of those sow systems aren't necessarily as beneficial, even though they are beneficial to crop ground here in Iowa. But it's an important point to always remember we're always in need of more wean pigs in Iowa. And then sometimes when we relied on places such as Canada to supply us a lot of feeder pigs and wean pigs, when we have economic issues with changes of the dollar or trade constraint, really throws a wrench sometimes into some of that supply and cost for us there. So always consider the fact that there'll always be a need for wean pigs in the state, and more importantly with that, you always have to look at where are the right places to put a sow farm. So biosecurity is so key. So the interesting thing about sow farm management is it's one of those things that takes a lot of skilled management. It takes a different level rather than just it's not checking feeders and checking health. It's you got the dynamics of breeding and managing different ages and growth stages and the reproductive status, the lactation periods and so forth. So different skill levels required in there versus a wean to finish, and especially just a finishing system. The sow farm, however, my aspect is the one that if you want to do something in a community and you want to create employment, create job opportunities, that sow farm, that breed to wean, breed to finish is one that creates a lot of economic turnover. And we can go through a set of information that really talks about all the inputs, the dynamic inputs, the dynamic costs that go into both construction and employment and all the services and utilities and things that are generated and used up in the sow system. So that's of importance to note too, but be prepared for the dynamics that go into furring. If you want to be successful, these are some opinion points for me from a sow production standpoint where you've got to be. You've got to have the best performance out there to be competitive, and I'm talking about that in regards to some reproductive efficiencies. We, for years, have shot this target out there that you've got to be 25 and now 30 pigs per sow per year, and in Europe it's well over 30 pigs per sow per year. But what makes up that number, pigs per sow per year? What's it cost you to get there, and what's the quality of piglets coming out of that is another issue. So I want to talk a lot about full value wean pigs, because ideally maybe the most beneficial system and one that's making the most money might be weaning 25 pigs per sow versus the one that's weaning 35, and those are some lightweight, low quality, high morbidity type pigs. Somewhere we're realizing there's a median to be in there, and some of that's breeding some robustness and some durability and longevity into these pigs. So health, always in this state, like I said, where we've got density and we have health seasonally, issues come up. There's a new disease on the horizon every 6 months or a couple years anyway that's there. So always looking at how do we manage health, from sourcing of genetics, closing up a herd as much as we can, watching people and traffic and all these biosecurity points. So health has to be a top priority in buying a farm or building a site, looking at what we can do there. Market, the top market, we've got to go after that full market pig, full market value type pig. Get some stability in your market, utilize all the marketing tools out there. I'm not the specialist in that by no means. But we've got to have a floor price on some of this and identifying some cost of production issues that are there, so we know to go after our top market. Labor efficiencies, we're always working on that, and we're learning different things for different parts of the country, utilizing labor, how much of it can we mechanize or should we mechanize? People are still an incredible asset in our industry, and having good employees that can be vested in the operation is so critical. So taking the time to train and recruit and retain the right people in your family or in your employment lines is so critical. Those that haven't looked at the industry very much, there's some really young ones in the audience here. I always want to remind that any commodity, especially in agriculture, is very cyclical. You know, right now we're facing a little higher supply in a lot of protein sectors, in beef and pork and others. And so if you look at where we're headed, projection, again, this is always projection, and this is an industry average. It's not individual farms, and hopefully we can always do better than the Iowa State projections that are there. And again, Lee Schultz in the Department of Economics supplied this to me. But you can see, fair to finish in general, we've got some pretty decent profits over years, and this only goes back about 8 years on this slide, but we can see it up and down. It ebbs and flows. It used to be a 6-year cycle, is what we always talked about. But you can see time periods in there. There's 12-year period or a 12-month period where we were at losses. You have to be prepared for that, and looking at cash flows, looking at that, maintaining net worth and maintaining equity in an operation to go through times that are down. So, and I could do that for feeder finish as well. So finishing. In Iowa, we're looking at the fact that we've got a lot of feed grains in Iowa that we want to, the old term is, walk it off the farm, right? It was always better. Pigs were called the mortgage lifter. If we put that corn through the pig, we are essentially adding value. Value added is a big term these days, but that's the way we did it. We put it through livestock, and we're selling protein instead of starch or the grains back into the world supply. So slaughter capacity, I mentioned that earlier, but we're building new plants. We've got a great successful processing industry here, shipping it out of the Midwest and relying on it going out across the country and across the world. Exports are a big key for us today too. What works well for a crop farmer is finishing. Having a barn or two, we can chore them in a matter of 2, 3, 4 hours, and we still got time seasonally to get our crops in and out and take care of that regard. So they are a tremendously a good fit, whether you're feeding your own grain through a grain bank program, granular feed, or being a contract grower. It's a phenomenal fit. So a lot of flexibility in the risk and the ownership. So the purchasing side of ownership, being involved with sow co-op, being both breeds to market, or there's flows where we can buy pigs from different places in the state, buy them out in North Carolina. A lot of pigs coming out of the South, where they really don't finish any pigs anymore in the states of Arkansas or Mississippi or whatever. And we can buy flows of pigs coming up. I'll spend more time after this slide going into contract production and a lot of different arrangements there to look at. So what's successful in finishing? Health rises to the top by far in this state. Finding a flow that fits your system and your management of pigs that are not necessarily naive, but the immune status that fits your region, your county that you're working in. Sometimes I'll get producers, just had one a couple days ago, that said, my pigs are too clean now. Their sow farm that they had shares in was 2 counties south of where they were. They were finishing pigs in more of a dense area. And they said, our pigs are too clean. Well, are they truly too clean, or are the neighbors too dirty? Right? So we regionally, we need to communicate, see what's going on. And we're always excellent from a university standpoint, from a research standpoint in pharmaceuticals, coming up with new and better vaccines. But health is one that can be very costly from a medicine standpoint, from a mortality and morbidity standpoint, and from a labor standpoint. And something that really can decrease worker morale or ownership morale when we have high mortalities and treatment. So manure rises to the top. This is when we get into some of these contract grow arrangements. Talk about manure being liquid gold. And granted, fertilizer costs are a little lower than they have been in the last 4, 5, 6 years, but incredible value in manure. And a lot of times I like to say about $5 a pig. It's $10 to $15 per pig space in a wean to fin barn or feeder fin barn that you're there. Now net you're down half of this. I put 10 to 15. You're closer to $10 at fertilizer prices now. After application costs, we're closer to about $5 a space, something like that. So and there's variations in that. How you would utilize it too. So. Diversify. Diversification's a really good key in Iowa agriculture between crops and livestock, and utilizing your time on and off the farm. Pretty good there. Top markets, if you're in ownership side of this versus contract, a lot of risk management tools that are out there. Use them. There's revenue or margin insurance on livestock insurance products too that can be used. Feedstuffs, we talk about corn and beans, but there's a lot of ingredients, and nowadays logistics can get us a lot of things into the Midwest that we can utilize. Obviously, distillers grains is something for the past 15 years we've been using more and more of every day, and it works, and we're learning how to manage it. But yet, distillers grains aren't just distillers grains. They're changed every day, and there's more and more nutrient drawn out of a distiller's product from, seems like, every processor. A little different these days. So when we used to design diets 20 years ago that had 10 ingredients or less, now I've got a diet that may have up to 50 potential ingredients on any given week in variation. So that's there. Cost infrastructure, always watching that. And so when a lot of this is initially around the building cost. It can vary tremendously. Got to be wise with it, but also look at the longevity of a potential input or a potential building there. So the facilities, the technology is things that we've got out there, especially in a sow farm system. What type of technology you want to put into that barn? There's differences in what that's going to cost you today from a construction standpoint, but also from a maintenance standpoint. how heavily are your skills into technology and into computer skills management? It'll vary a lot, so we'll do that. Here's a quick slide here on what's been returns on wean to finished production. Again, the same kind of cycles. It ebbs and flows, ups and downs depending on supply and depending on a world market standpoint and a value of the dollar now that we're so reliant on exports as well and politics and so forth. So you'll see the losses that can be faced in wean to fin when we do have some losses potentially get higher than what we are in a breed to finish type situation. So, okay, niche markets. We'll stand those alone and aside from commodity production and contract production. Something unique as an opportunity for your young people to get into and get a lot of calls on these things. But what defines them is a various set of things. So don't just say a niche is a niche, but it could be something based on a production system. We're pasture reared, we're crate or stall free sows and so forth like that. Eating quality based on a breed description, and a lot more of those heritage breeds that fall into that line now, Berkshires and Durocs and others. A lot of times it's just a story that goes alongside of it, right? It's a family farm component. There's a true or false health claim to it. The health perceptions, no subtherapeutic antibiotics, which is generally the whole industry now. But completely antibiotic free, which maybe I don't necessarily promote totally, but if a portion of that production can be, and still give you the allowance to treat animals with medications and just separate them off from a market, it is a possibility. Different diets, GMO free type of diet, an organic fed vegetarian type diet might be something that differentiates you too. So the key with this one is certainly in Iowa, that demand's not here, but we've got that demand out on our coast. We export those to the East Coast and West Coast primarily, but we do have, some metropolitan cities. You can find restaurants in Des Moines, and you can find some grocers that do provide some of these. But the true value in this is getting them outside of the Midwest a lot of times. So to be successful here, you'll notice that the 3 points I put up on here, there's a key word in every one of these you're going to find: market. Marketing, right? You need to spend in niche production, you got to spend as much time as you do producing pigs as you do on the effort of marketing these things. And the stability of your market is so key. So where is that market? What can my market take as far as supply? You don't want to overproduce. Berkshire production right now in the Midwest is actually being a little bit oversupplied at the moment. So we've got guys with Berkshires ready to go to market that are really constrained in finding that, because we've got to have some premium if we're going to raise these. A lot of times these niche opportunities aren't nearly as efficient from a growth or days standpoint, and certainly from a feed standpoint, nor from a reproductive standpoint. So we've got to have a significant premium over what commodity level pork is raising. So what is that premium? Get a floor price, some type of base to cover some cost. If you're going to enter into some niche, it's very important. Get something there that's solid. How stable is it? What's the culture of that market? Where is it, and where is it going to in the future? Have a really good partnership with those that are doing the marketing for you or with you, and a partnership with those doing the processing. Get a lot of this secured. So we see these come and go, and there's some that are very successful. I should say few that are very successful from a long-term standpoint. So there's some really intimate conversations that need to be done before you enter into some niche pieces there. So other considerations on a production side, I mentioned that we lack some of the efficiencies there that we might with commercial line pigs and production systems. So the mating systems, a lot of times it's easier. Most of this is a scale type of consideration, how big you are. But figure out a batch system is probably the easiest way to do some of these, both from a breeding standpoint and a finishing standpoint, so that we can market and we can feed and breed and so forth, all in a batch, and we're not scattered out on our labor and our other costs that are figured into that pig flow issue. Health, while I might not rise it to the top as I do on some of my commercial production issues, it's still a constraint. Smaller entities don't face near the health challenges unless you're not communicating with the other neighbors that are also raising pigs to know what's going on and what to be prepared for in that. There's also some given, maybe some better durability with some of the genetics that we might use in the niche production, but not necessarily a given. Still stay up to speed on definitely on biosecurity practices that you're doing there. Genetics, a lot of times are determined by that market, but what I want to look at here is natural mating tends to be more of the occurrence in a niche system or a smaller scaled system versus AI on 99% of commercial line pigs. So still want to encourage AI utilization in this, but when we have natural mating, get the boars that are still got some aggressiveness to them, and some feet and legs under them that are going to last in the herd to get some breeding done there. The other consideration, more importantly here on niche, is yeah, we can sell and we can get a good premium for those hogs that make it to market, but what about the great portion, especially maybe your antibiotic-free type of a niche? What about that portion that you've treated with medications that have got to find an alternate market or a coal market? What about the morbidity that you face in some genetic lines that maybe just aren't as immune to from a health standpoint, or that you face seasonal weather issues in some production systems too that are going to draw back the growth rate on a portion of pigs, or you have the fallouts? Where do we go with these? Do we have a roaster pig market that we can go? Do we have a local locker pig market that can help subsidize those that aren't going to that? Because if we're just giving these up as a coal pig that's going into a coal market, we could be losing a lot of value here that you really might need to help you come up to that break-even price line. Okay, so contract finishing. We'll roll into this one, and I'm apologizing. We're going to roll pretty fast. I'm going to set you up for some of the considerations on the farm level, and then Dr. Edwards is going to talk about what we need from a financial standpoint to go to the bank and to get that loan and get that lending standpoint, which is really key. So contract finishing, the facts there, a lot of different ways to approach it. Sow farm co-ops, we can partner with another independent producer in the region that's supplying pigs that needs another 600, 1,200, 2,400 space and supply you with pigs, and you work out a contract arrangements there. Grain cooperatives are also involved in some of this in the past. Most generally, it's an integrator that's owning the sow production or a contract sow production, and then they contract a wean to finish production or a nursery or finisher, and you can line up some of these arrangements with you. Wean to finish, in the past 10 years, I kind of took the word nursery out of my vocabulary, but we're building contract nurseries again. In Northwest Iowa, Plymouth County, I've 4 or 5 of them here in the last few months. We're putting some nurseries there, contract nurseries in South Dakota. So a system is bringing back the nursery concept, while another integrator is phasing out nurseries. So what fits different skills and different objectives is there. Construction costs, the constraints are really high right now on these buildings and cash flows. Construction costs have really crept up. The fixed cost on building that's getting high. So what do we look at? Tunnel ventilation. I'm from southern Iowa. I can maybe consider that. Northern Iowa, wean to finish, we're definitely going to be looking at more tunnel ventilation facilities, and generally we're tunnel vent all over the state now, but natural ventilation curtain-sided barns are another option to start cheapening that up from a construction standpoint, but we'll catch you later on in utilities, burning LP in a natural ventilated barn. So manure, I mentioned that earlier. That's the ticket here on the contract finishing piece. What are the arrangement options? Because there's a lot of different ways that we can enter into contract production. We have a basic contract that stands out there where I supply 3 acres, I own those 3 acres, I go ahead and build a barn on 2 or 3 acres or a set of barns on some acres. I'm going to provide all the labor that goes into that and the utilities, all the supplies and services that take it, the maintenance. I'm going to receive a payment for my rent or my services, my care of that. That's my contract payment, and I get the manure that I can utilize on my crop ground, or I can work with a neighboring crop farmer to sell or buy or give the manure away for cost of application or something. It's a basic contract with ranges depending on age of facility and care, and whether it's feeder to finish or wean to finish, from anywhere $43 and below, basically, is kind of where we're looking at. So an owner contract is one where I'm going to own that barn, I'm going to build the facility, or I own it, and I own the ground. I'm going to provide all the inputs except the labor. All right, I'm going to get a contract payment, and I do get the manure out of it, which is what I want. But yet the integrator or the pig owner is going to supply the labor and the management, the daily management of it. What we call an owner contract. We have a sell, or I call it a manure contract, where as an investment, I'm just going to sell off this 5 acres, this couple acres, for somebody else to build a barn on. I'm going to retain the manure rights to it. That's what I consider my value versus what, I sold some thousands of dollars worth of the land, but the investor, the non-local person maybe build, I'm going to get that manure. I've got the application cost to it, and managing that, but I'm going to get the manure. Then we've got a sale or management and manure contract where I could sell that acreage and somebody else builds a building, I get the manure, but then they hire me back as a caretaker and do the daily management, do the daily site maintenance to it. And so that's what I refer to as a management and manure contract. And there's different intricacies to all of these and different variations of it as well. And the payments and responsibilities or liabilities vary with all of these. And we could spend a lot of time talking about all of those. So considerations, other considerations here in contract finishing. Boy, a lot of this discussion can be real intricate, and there's a lot of written language in a contract, and there's a lot of non-written language in a contract that's even more important a lot of times. And so I want to encourage, Grant, there's a lot of things here, and I can give you, I said I can give you these slides if you want, but visit with others that are raising pigs for that pig supplier, whether it's an independent local person supplying those pigs or it's an integrator. If it's somebody new coming into the area, find out a little bit of history. Find out how those arrangements are going. You need to fit in with the culture of that company and find out, is this the partner? And I definitely want you to view it as a partnership when you're a custom finisher or a custom feeder. Where does this fit in with me and my long-term objectives and goals? So know their financial history, how long they've been in the industry, have they been profitable? Has it been something that's been sold back and forth or whatnot? Look at the health. And each company will have a different health flow. And they may not tell you what health flow you're going to get necessarily, but each of their sow pods and sow farms have got a different health status. And so that'll relate to a lot of the treatment you give it, or relate heavily to the amount of labor that you would spend also in time in a given barn, depending on the health status. But that'll generally be associated with also the region that you're in as well, to fit some of the same health statuses of the finishing herd in your area. The trust level, not only trust level with the environmental services guy or the site development person, somebody that comes to you with the contract, but the ownership trust and the trust level you would have with a field person, somebody, a field staff member that's going to come by the farm quite often that's there. What's the stability of those employees? How long have they been there with that job too? So a handful of other things. What is the labor share in load out, in vaccination crews and assistance? What's been their history? What do they supply there? Do they give you a little bit of bonus on different either production parameters or bonus on labor things for vaccinating or load out, things like that? So do they provide other assistance such as environmental services, manure testing, manure management plans that are there? Do they help finance? Some of them can go that step with a young farm without a lot of equity to come forward or help you obtain that. And then manure value, I'll put a slide or two on that if we've got time at the end on manure. Understand those contracts, read through it, and I mentioned earlier, whether it's written or whether it's verbal, always make sure it's written. Get things in writing and don't necessarily rely on everything that is verbal, because things can change. In that, look at the terms of that contract and get some, the length of time period. The banker or the lender is going to require it. One thing, you got to cash flow it over a certain time period, but make sure that payment is there for life of whatever it takes you to pay that facility off potentially and beyond. So payment terms, repairs, maintenance, these a lot of things some lenders can go over with you too, and I can certainly spend more time with you talking about that. What else? What's required of you in a custom feeding situation from a management standpoint? In daily care, that can vary a lot with each facility and each system. What costs go in there? What are the expectations for how you run the barn from a ventilation and an energy standpoint? What is the SOP there? What's been the experience of another grower his cost. Somebody can come to you, a pig supplier, with a given building package and a given cash flow that shows you here's your utility cost. But are they going to be on the high side or the low side or the median side of where it truly is with their other growers? Probably going to be toward the lower and definitely not in the higher portion. But visit with another grower. What's been your experience with this same system, this same barn, the same heaters, and the same SOPs for ventilation and the same growth phases? Does this compare? Because you can be eaten alive unexpectedly sometimes with high energy costs. You get a barn sitting empty in the wintertime. For some reason, a health challenge come up in the pig flow, and I'm not getting any weaned pigs between December to February for some reason. You will be killed in trying to heat that barn, and plus a barn just doesn't stay as good a condition health-wise, the concrete and everything else lines when we're not heating it. So what happens in that situation? Do they still cover you on a pig space per year, or is your contract based on pigs out the door, for example? So make sure some of that's there. I highlighted two of them from time to time. I'm not going to hit on everything, but insurance and liabilities. Insurance with one carrier is not the same coverage as with another company necessarily. And who has the insurance? The pig owner, the barn owner. I'm going to tell you, both of you somewhere ought to have some insurance coverages, and that's a legal question, sometimes beyond me, but we can get you help there. And the liabilities associated with that, the death losses, mortalities, rendering, so forth, that go along with that. Very, very keys. So I'm not going to put a cash flow up here, but there's one thing I do want to, well, I got some components to a cash flow, okay? So we're going to put up a 2,400 head barn, a very common size, whether it's 12, 24, 4,800 head barns. Here's what we're looking at, kind of. Construction cost at 260 to 300, and I'm going to tell you they really easily approach 300 today when you start putting in the total package. You lump in the land, you lump in all the infrastructure, and a cash flow comes to you from a builder a lot of times, and that package says $255 turnkey for all the building and set up to go, $270 or something like that today, wean to finish, feeder to fin. But that didn't include your local infrastructure, your water, your electric, and everything that came in there, and some variation, especially in water, how far away from you were from those given facilities, especially if you want to put a barn back a half mile down the lane, and there's not utilities right to it. So a lot of times it can, I know, and actually heard one here recently that approached well over 300, and I don't know how that one's ever going to cash flow. To cash flow these, we've got to come up a lot of times with a lot of down payment. We've got to have that 100,000, 200,000 or more just put out in front of this $750,000 facility, which 20 years ago and 10 years ago, contract barns were really a no-brainer. They were really easy from a cash flow standpoint with manure value and a contract payment. Fertilizer prices were a little higher, so our values were a little bit better on manure. Today it's pretty tight. I would tell you today it's pretty tight unless you've got the cash to really help do it, or the collateral and some other barns are maybe getting paid off, for an example. So I'll just throw those up there real quick. What's a cash flow look like? I throw this up here, you probably don't necessarily know what I'm getting after. That one is a really thin line, right? There's no manure valued in there, right? And I've talked a lot about this over the last 10 years. The second line's a little heavier. Notice that both those lines are black. Fortunately for you, they're not red. But I throw the manure value in there, and say on a 2,400, there's an extra $12,000 net. It's 25, 28, maybe even up to 30,000 at higher fertilizer prices a few years ago. But now that anhydrous is down at 500 and below, and others, P&Ks, are $300 and $400. It's dropped off, but it's still there. But when you go to the banker, bankers aren't going to let you put a manure value into your cash flow. They want to see that stand alone. And there's some intrinsic values there, and that ebbs and flows as well with fertilizer costs, with fuel costs on application. But this is true, and we all talk about it. Okay, so it's there. I think I'm going to skip here from a time standpoint. I'll have Tommy get up here and introduce Dr. Edwards, but I've got some materials and we've got some models I've developed with Iowa State on on the impact, both the cash flow and the community impact, the agronomic impact of a 2400. We call it a model. Okay, now so if that's something that's of interest to you, and we've got a lot of the siting considerations to go in there. I work with the community assessment model from an odor standpoint, the impact on the community of putting up things. So if we're looking at putting up a new contract finisher, we can help you there. More importantly, before I leave you, I want to maybe introduce a concept to you as a young person. We can't afford to put up a $750,000 or over $500,000 new finisher. But what's the opportunity to approach a 60-year-old individual that's crop farming, is no longer providing his own labor to 1 or 2 or 3 sites of finishing? Approach him, take over the labor, maybe introduce the concept of buying 1 or 2 of these sites on contract. You know, they can't necessarily sell it outright to you at one lump, but from a depreciation standpoint, a tax standpoint, maybe they could sell you a site or 2. Get your foot in the door to buy a used facility that's 15 years old. Granted, you're going to have to put $100,000, $120,000 of new roof or new ceiling, new gating, and some upkeep, heaters in it, and ventilation potentially. But that's $120,000 plus an annual contract payment of buying it out. It's a whole lot better than going forth and putting up a several $100,000 facility to pay for. We get this one partly paid down, and then maybe down the road 10 years you can put up a new one, or buy some others, or brother buy into the crop ground side of it, something like that. So go ahead.
Okay, I think we'll hold our questions until after Dr. Edwards speaks, but let's give a thank you now for Colin here. We appreciate what he shared with us. Our next speaker is Dr. William Edwards. He earned his PhD in economics at Iowa State University in 1979, the same year that he went to work for the Department of Economics. Even though Dr. Edwards is retired, he still devotes a lot of his time to the Ag Decision Maker website. And when it started in 1996 as a monthly hard copy publication that shares information on farm management and ag economics. Ag Economics has grown into an online site that receives 1 million reader hits each year. Dr. Edwards oversees the development of some of the most requested information that ISU Extension and Outreach has to offer. His top 2 focuses are land rental rate and custom farming rate surveys. So I use both those myself, Dr. Williams. Please help me welcome Dr. William Edwards.
All right, thank you very much, Tom. And yeah, I was afraid he was going to mention what year I started. And actually, the truth is it was 5 years before that. And I look out here and I see maybe 1, maybe 2 people that were actually alive in 1974. But that's fine. Yeah, I was there a long time. He mentioned the custom rate survey, land rental survey. I don't do those anymore, so I won't take any responsibility or credit for those. I pass that on to my predecessors, but that was something that I did work on for a long time. Well, let's talk a little bit about growing your livestock operation. One of the things that I have continued to do, even though I've been retired from Extension, is work with the Agricultural Credit School, which is a joint venture between Iowa State Extension and the Iowa Bankers Association. It takes place every year in June, and we bring in basically ag loan officers from the commercial banks around Iowa for a week. Then they come back another year for another week, and we talk about lending money to farmers and operating a bank in a profitable manner as well. So I always learn a lot from those people. I hope they learn something from each other and from us also. But so I'm going to talk a little bit about what lenders might look for if you're coming in looking for financing. And it's kind of a given that maybe a few lucky individuals get started in the livestock industry completely on their own and are self-financed. But for an awful lot of you, you're going to be talking to either a commercial bank or Farm Credit Services or Farm Service Agency or one of the other lenders. So probably the first thing they're going to ask for is a net worth statement, or more commonly called a balance sheet. Basically, what do you own? What do you owe? What's the difference between the two? Very simple concept. Now, when you get down into the nitty-gritty of the details, One exercise that we always do with the bankers is I give them a case study, basically a set of facts of assets and liabilities for a hypothetical farm, and have them get in small groups and come up with a balance sheet for this farm. And then they go up, we have a blackboard up front, and they write down total assets, total liabilities, and net worth that their group came up with. Well, of course, I throw a few red herrings and things in there. Typically, out of maybe 10 to 15 small groups, there'll be maybe one or two that come up with the same numbers, even though they're all starting with the same set of facts. Well, that's an eye-opener to most of them. They figure, well, balance sheet's pretty cut and dried. Well, no, not always. So I'm not going to hit all the details, but a few of the big things that you need to think about. One, we'd like to see those as of January 1, if possible, mainly so it's consistent from one year to the next, so that if you're comparing year-to-year balance sheets, the closer you can be to doing it on the same date each year, the better. Now, why January 1? Because they moved all the good bowl games to the other later than that anyway, so what else is there to do? No, it's when we go to the second part, we start looking at income and building an accrual income statement, having the balance sheet at the beginning and the end of the time period that we keep track of income and expenses just makes everything much easier. And so since most people are on a calendar year tax basis, being on a calendar year net worth statement works out. Now, you may not do it on January 1. Maybe you do it February 1, but you can always back things back to as of January 1. Okay, machinery and equipment. Just go to the depreciation schedule, right? Got your taxes done by then, or maybe an estimate. Funny thing, that big tractor on the depreciation schedule has a value of 0. Ooh, is that good? Is that right? No, it's because you took 179 depreciation on it and wrote the whole thing off in the first year. So on tax purposes, it has a value of 0. Well, we all know that's far from the truth. So basically, do not use income tax, particularly off the depreciation schedule. Those numbers serve a purpose, but they have nothing to do with reality in terms of financial situation. Land is a big problem on balance sheets. What do you value land at? If you own farmland, and the longer you owned it, the bigger problem it becomes. Now, most lenders will have kind of a standard number in their county, probably, that they'll put land down at. You know, if you get into southern Iowa, where you've got half the farm is good cropland and half of it's timber and pasture, then it becomes a little more complicated than that. But if you've owned the land very long, what even a conservative market value today may be very different than what you paid for. Now, if you bought it 3 years ago, is the current market value likely to be higher or lower than you paid for it? It's probably lower, isn't it? You know, we've had about 3-4 years now of modest declines in land values, not precipitous, but so a market value might actually be less than you paid for. Okay. Anyway, our recommendation, and ours, I'm talking about basically the extension economics people, is a double column balance sheet. Show land at both original cost value, what you paid for it, and conservative current market value, which is more of a collateral value, what the bank will put a value on it for collateral purposes if it's used as collateral. Why? Because when we look at net worth, it's useful to know whether that net worth is based on what we call earned net worth, which means it's profits from the farming business that have been retained and reinvested, or is it inflationary net worth? Has it come about simply because you own land and the value of that land went up, so your net worth went up? And of course, today we might even call deflationary net worth. Maybe we've lost net worth the last 3 years, but only because the bank was writing down the land values, not because we actually lost money farming. So it makes a big difference to distinguish between those two. So that's why we recommend showing it both ways and being very clear about what those numbers represent. Okay, a third thing is farm and family assets. Banks tend to put everything on the balance sheet, and they don't care whether it's really a business asset or a family asset. They'll put the minivan and the house and the boat and all these things on the balance sheet. They make good collateral that, you know, it doesn't matter. But when it comes to a business analysis standpoint, those assets don't usually earn any income, do they? They're not meant to. We don't buy them for producing income purposes. So it kind of messes up all of the efficiency ratios and things. So what we recommend is just have them in two different sections. You have a farm or a business balance sheet, cut it off there. Below that, there's a space you can put down personal assets. And then if you want to add the whole ball of wax together and say, yeah, this is our total family financial situation, fine, no problem with that. But I think it's a good idea to have a clear difference between the farm, business assets, and the family. Okay, we have some spreadsheets. I won't show you those right now, but on the Ag Decision Maker, that's our website. That's one of the things I invested a lot of time in the last 15 years or so that I was working. And now some of you have nice farm accounting packages that do all the financial statements and things for you. That's great. If you don't have something like that, these are standalone spreadsheets. You can enter the information and does all the calculations for you and the formats there and everything. And we think they're pretty useful. Okay, second part of that, income or profit and loss. Now the second thing the lender will ask for typically are tax returns. Last 3 years, maybe 5 years, depending on the type of financing you're expecting. Why do they want to know your tax returns? Well, supposedly to know whether you've been making any money or not. Now the problem is, what is the purpose? What do most farmers have as an objective on their tax return? Make that number as small as possible. So that's not really a very good indicator. And of course, things like Section 179 depreciation expensing means the kind of the bottom line on the tax forms is meaningless from a business analysis standpoint. It can be any number you want to make it anymore. So now the tax returns are somewhat useful. You can look at, okay, what did they spend on various categories during the year? And if you're doing a cash flow budget for the coming year, that's a good place to start. What you spent last year is a good place to start. So there is some value, but what we like to do is make some adjustments to the tax returns, particularly the Schedule F, which is where most of the information comes from. And we take that and we combine it with the beginning and the ending balance sheets, particularly the current assets, grain on hand, livestock on hand. And we adjust for whether those inventories grew or whether they decreased in value. The worst problem is with the grain farms, really, because how much grain you carry over one year may be completely different the next year, depending on yields, depending on marketing patterns, and so on. And so trying to get a true picture of what the farm produced is really, really difficult unless you take into account those year-end inventories. So we put those on, and then we also take out the tax depreciation number and try to come up with what we call an economic depreciation number based on some rules of thumb that we use that are more representative of how much those machinery and buildings and things may have decreased in value. So those are probably the two biggest adjustments that we make and try to come up with a more realistic estimate of net farm income or profit the last year. Okay, so pretty easy to do. Again, we have some spreadsheets on the website where you basically just start with the Schedule F and the beginning and ending balance sheets, and it'll go through and do the math for you. And so we call that an accrual income statement, and that's really the more accurate representation of the farm. From that, then you can do a few ratios. The lenders usually look at three ratios. a total debt to asset ratio just to measure how much you owe as a percentage of your total assets, okay? Some of them do the inverse, but as long as they're consistent, it's okay. So, you know, that's pretty easy. If you got the balance sheet, you just take the two numbers at the bottom, divide one by the other. The other one they call the current ratio. For some reason, we typically do that the other way around. We take assets and divide by liabilities. Again, if you got the balance sheet, those numbers are there, pretty easy to calculate. And that's a kind of a measure of liquidity, you know, okay, you know, how much, if we liquidated everything we have right now on grain and livestock inventories, and these are the liabilities that are going to come up in the next 12 months, is there enough there to cover it all? Typically, they'd like to see at least 2 to 1, maybe more, on that current ratio. Working capital is really the same thing. It's just the difference between the two. You know, how much cushion do you have for the next 12 months between what you're going to sell and what you might have for payments. Now, there's a lot left out. These are quick and dirty ratios. They're easy because you only need the balance sheet. They leave a lot out. If you're finishing feeder pigs, for example, you know, 2/3, 3/4 of the pigs you sell don't even show up on that beginning balance sheet. So it really only shows what you have on hand January 1. So you really need to go to a full-blown cash flow budget if those ratios are at all, you know, marginal, we'll say. And I would say don't look at 1 year, look at the past 3 to 5 years if possible. Now, a few other ratios you can look at pretty easily. Net as a percent of gross income. Again, if you've done this accrual adjusted income statement, you've got a gross income figure, you've got the net figure at the bottom. What percent? Typically, we see probably 15 to 20% over the long run would be what a typical average net as a percent of gross. You know, 5 years ago, we were seeing 30 to 40% net incomes. Last year, probably 10% would have been good for a lot of people, particularly grain farmers. So it's going to change from year to year. A couple of other things: gross income per person, how many people are employed on this farm, how many people are employed full-time, okay? You may be one person, but maybe if you're working off the farm as well, maybe that's not a full FTE. The other one is gross income divided by dollars of assets, how many dollars you generate for every dollar of assets. Now, you need to look at those two together because if you have a very labor-intensive operation, income per person may look pretty low, but income per dollar of assets is pretty high because you've got an old worn-out set of machinery and some old buildings, and you're doing everything by hand, so you're doing a great return on assets because you don't have much invested. Your return on labor may not be so good, but that may be the stage that you're in. So you kind of need to look, hopefully you're looking good on both of those, but oftentimes there's a trade-off. Of course, livestock cost per head, feed cost per head, all those typical production ratios are useful. Okay, now, you got to have something to compare to. There are several places you can get some benchmark numbers. Extension gets data through the Iowa Farm Business Association each year, and we do publish that in a format where you can go and make some comparisons each year. Unfortunately, there's kind of a time lag. We don't get the data till probably August or September from the previous year. So, but you can look back. This one I like, even though it's from Minnesota. I have no problem with that. But they have what they call FinBin. And they get data actually from 6 or 8 different states, and they have all these different livestock categories. So let's say weaning to finish contract grower, for example. And it does it on a pig space basis, and then you just come down to the bottom and click on Generate Report. These are 2015 numbers, and see if we make this a little bigger. There you go. Okay, so in this one there's 51 farms. And what I like is that they not only show you this is the median number for the entire group, but they show you the distribution. So from 10% up to 100%, so each one of those would represent 5 farms, basically, from the lowest 10% to the top. And you see they are ranked by gross margin per pig space. So the lowest 10% or the lowest 5 farms average $25 per pig space. The top 5%, 10%, excuse me, average 64. Now that's a big difference, and you can look then and decide not only whether you're above or below average, but where do you fall. It's kind of like your old tests of basic skills that you used to do in school, you know. You always got that. I know you all got 99% probably, but some people didn't. So anyway, that's a pretty good benchmark. Doesn't include Iowa data, but it's still pretty useful. Okay. Cash flow budgets. Colin mentioned that. Certainly, in the short run, a bi-monthly or quarterly cash flow budget, particularly if you're a livestock finishing operation or cash grain operation, pretty important because very uneven cash flows throughout the year. Now, you know, again, if you're just finishing feeder pigs, maybe your cash flow is pretty even through the year, which means that it's probably not as important to have that monthly or bi-monthly cash flow. The other type would be an annual cash flow, and these are useful if you're investing in a longer-term operation. You're putting in a new livestock operation, particularly if you're investing in a breeding livestock operation where you're going to have several years of kind of ramping up before you get to full speed. And those first few years between the time you invest and the time that you're up operating at full capacity and efficiency are the critical years. And so there, probably an annual cash flow budget for the first 3 to 5 years is pretty critical. And that's going to take some time and effort to do. That's not something you're going to sit down and do over your lunch hour, probably. We do have some tools for working with that. One of the critical things is what kind of planting prices. Fortunately, Lee Schultz, our livestock outlook person, does publish a table every year on the Ag Decision Maker with quarterly prices for this year and then some projections through 2018 as well. They may not be right, whether they're right or wrong, at least they're objective, they're third hand, and they're probably as good a guess as anybody else can give you. So that's available. Did you pass out those sheets, Tom? Yeah, okay. So, you know, a lot of the stuff I'm talking about is listed on that handout. Okay. Going one step farther, besides just the financial statements and a cash flow budget, is what we would call a business plan. And a cash flow budget, particularly a multi-year budget, could be a part of that, but what we're looking is a much more of a description of where you are, what resources you have, where you want to go. Description of the business now, where you're going, what's your vision down the road, 5 years from now, 10 years. What do you bring to the table, both financial assets, physical assets, buildings, equipment, and maybe more important, personal assets? What are your skills and experience in this operation? Do you have a really good background, or do you have good consultants, or are you going to be learning on the fly? Potential markets, particularly if it's a niche market type of thing, pretty important. If it's just commercial product, that may not be such a problem. Then the financial statements and budgets, as we mentioned, and some risk management strategies. How are you going to mitigate your risk? How do you even out highs and lows? Colin showed you that graph on the finishing profits like that, okay? You know, if you've been around for 30 years and you got pretty good working capital behind you, yeah, you can basically ride out those highs and lows. If you're a young producer and you don't have that, then you better have a plan in place how you're going to do that. And then finally, what's your request? If you're bringing this to a a bank, don't just walk in and say, I need some money. You need to have a request. What do you need the money for? How much do you need? What is your repayment plan? Is this 1 year, 5 years, 10 years down the road? If you walk in with a plan, you're going to get received much more warmly than if the banker has to ask all those questions and you're sitting there with kind of a blank look on your face. Okay, a couple of resources. Ag Decision Maker, we have some fact sheets that talk about creating a business plan, what some of the common elements are. Even better, there's a place called Ag Plan, and again, this comes out of University of Minnesota, what they call the Center for Farm Financial Management. They have a lot of really good resources there. This is basically kind of a shell of a business plan that anybody can log into and online, and it kind of is, fill in the blanks kind of thing. You can do some of it, save it, go back later, pick it up again. You don't have to do it all at once, but it kind of tells you, what are the elements you need to do, so you don't have to figure that out. And then unless you fill in your own information, you can even share it with, if you have a consultant, an accountant, or other consultants, Colin Johnson, for example, they can look at your plan, comment on it, send it back to you, and so on. So it's a very useful site for doing a business plan. Okay, I guess finally, resources from Iowa State. We have our livestock specialists. Colin and Tom are two of those. We've got 6 of those folks around the state, as well as people on campus. We've got farm management specialists. These are the people that I worked with basically in my career. We have 8 of those now in different areas around the state. We have what we call Farm Financial Planning Associates. These aren't quite as well known, but we found out, this goes clear back to the 1980s, that our regular extension staff often didn't have the time to spend a lot of one-on-one time with farmers that really needed to do some major financial restructuring, And so we put together a set of people. Some were retired farmers, some former ag teacher, former bankers, to be available on call to go out and sit down at the kitchen table with folks. And not necessarily if they were in trouble, but also if they were planning a major expansion or bringing in another family member into the business, anything like that, where they sit down and help you develop first of all, the financial statements, and then look at some different budgeting plans. And they have some software where they can lay out different alternatives side by side, work through the cash flow implications, the labor implications, the profit and loss potentials. So we have 6 of these folks scattered around the state, Webster City, 2 of them in Newell. This actually is father and a son that work together on this. 1 in Knoxville, 1 in Iowa City, and 1 in Red Oak. So if you're looking at kind of a major restructuring, expansion of the business, bringing in more family members or partners, and you'd like to lay out some alternatives before you go in and visit with the lender, I'd say get a hold of one of these folks. You can go through your county extension office or any of your area extension specialists. They can put you in touch with them. And last, we have the Beginning Farmer Center, which is based really out here in Urbandale. They have a program called Start to Farm, New Farmer Learning Network, which are small groups around the state for young farmers, kind of a peer group where they can get together and exchange ideas. I know Colin's got a couple of you. Do you have one too, Tom? Okay. It's kind of a joint venture between the livestock and the farm management extension specialists. What are there? About, 10, 15 of these around the state. Yeah, kind of in various stages, anywhere from maybe 10 to 20 people in each group. And so if you're interested in any of those, again, talk to your county extension office or your area livestock specialists. And I think they have a lot of they have a good time as well. It's not all educational. A little bit of social life in there too, isn't there? That's what I've heard. So, okay, so those are some of the resources that are available, and I think at this time it'd be good to open it up for questions, comments, anything you want to do. You want to come on up here, Colin? You'll get all the questions, I'm sure.
Questions? Anybody need something? Yep, Don. Hi, Don.
For Dr. Edwards, you didn't mention on your balance sheet how to look at buildings. Colin talked about new buildings and so forth, but a lot of these younger farmers will be utilizing buildings that maybe purchase a farm with some of those on. How do you go about that? You can't use your depreciation schedule for that. That's totally incorrect.
So I'll have Dr. Ask the question for the recording here, but in that way you can summarize.
Okay. Yeah, I understand what you're saying, Don. You know, if it's a farm purchase somewhere, there's been a value placed separating out the land and the buildings in that purchase agreement, because if you're going to depreciate the buildings, you have to start somewhere. Now, if it was an appraisal, professional appraisal, they may have a fairly realistic value on those buildings. If there wasn't, you know, somebody pulled a number out of the air, who knows? I would tend to say, look at replacement value. This would be more maybe livestock buildings, grain storage, that sort of thing. Give it maybe a 20 or 25 year life. If it's already 10 years old, you cut it in half. If it's already 25 years old, I don't know what you do, you know.
You're saying replacement value. I'm finding that, insurance value is horrendous. And they make you have a replacement value, like a confinement hog building or something.
Okay.
And yet there's no value to it if it's not being used.
Yeah. You know, and I've known lenders told me that somebody puts up a new finishing building, they put it on the balance sheet at half its construction cost. And I think that's kind of appalling, frankly. I know their reasoning, because the collateral value of a building that is attached to land is, the potential market there is pretty small because it is attached to the land. But on the other hand, what happens is your net worth drops by half the cost of that building overnight, and I think that's a little unfair too. But the older buildings are a problem, you know, and I guess you have to start somewhere. What we usually recommend then, wherever you start, is take 5% of that off every year for depreciation. As a, you know, don't worry about the tax depreciation numbers. Machinery, we usually recommend 10% a year.
Another thing, I think, I didn't catch it there, but for going to your lender, the income tax form is worthless, but he wants it anyway.
He wants it anyway, because a lot of people don't have anything any better than that. Is one of the problems. And as I said, the cash expenses particularly are probably okay in terms of a basis for starting with a cash flow budget for the next year, unless you've done a lot of prepayment of expenses and things like that, which can skew things from one year to the next too.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, in the back. Percentage ownership? You got more than one owner, you mean? Are you talking like in a co-op or something? Oh, well, hopefully that co-op somewhere has a balance sheet, and if you own 10%, you take 10% of that. You know, hopefully if they're in a formal business structure like that, they should have, and if you're an owner, you should have access to that. But what you bring up a very good point. Is the multiple business entities, and with particularly family or extended family situations, we see that a lot. Where, how many of you are in a partnership, either formal or informal, with family members or friends or somebody else? Yeah, could be as formal as a corporation. It could be an LLC. It could be not something that's not written down anywhere. There are far too many of those. But that's a problem. When you come to the balance sheet, okay, what do you put down? Well, you may have several balance sheets. The corporation or the LLC may have its own balance sheet. Okay, I personally have a 25% interest in that entity, so what I put on my balance sheet is just 25% of the value of that other entity. And then I got all my personal assets too. In some of these families, you have operating corporations and the land is held over here, and it gets to be a real mess to sort out. But I think the biggest thing to remember is the messes that we see are the people that don't know who owns what, because they don't have a formal corporation, maybe not even an LLC, but they have bought equipment together over the years. Or we gave Junior 25 sows 5 years ago, and of course those sows are long gone. Who owns the breeding stock today? Oh, we don't quite remember how we did that. Equipment, trying to sort of transfer. Everybody wants to transfer the equipment without paying any income tax, so write it down. That's all I can say is write it down, because your memory is not as good as you think it's going to be. And we get in situations with families especially where people don't really know who owns what, and the worst part is when they disagree on who owns what. And there's no written records, So that's where the tax returns actually are useful, at least on a depreciation schedule. That piece of equipment or even the breeding stock should show up on somebody's depreciation schedule. Now, hopefully, the same item does not show up on more than one depreciation schedule. I would not swear that has not happened, okay? But at least that's a place to start as to who owns what and when it changed hands. I'm sorry, that's a long answer, but that was a slide I forgot to talk about.
I want to add, there's no cookie cutter way to start farming. You know that. There's no cookie cutter way to go about financing and valuing them a lot of times, but there is other, maybe contracts in production is a little bit of a cookie cutter program, but there's still intricacies there. But there are a lot of models, there's a lot of case studies out there, there's a lot of mentors, there's senior producers out there that don't have a successor, don't have a succession plan. So I think Don brought up something good there in how do you value facilities. Look at people that are brought in, sons and daughters, brought on off-farm heirs. How do you integrate them? I think we really need to, in this agriculture, there's a lot of that out there, off-farm ownership, that we need to keep young people owning agriculture, keep investing in the community. And so I appreciate your interest in looking at opportunities and how to stay in the industry here.
Colin, is there any chance that you would share a little bit about how you worked in after your dad's death on your grandpa's operation?
There's all kinds of unique situations, and I had a father that died in 2009. I was working full-time for the university from a swine perspective and employment, and obviously your heart is always on the farm, and when you grow up somewhere, that local dirt's in your DNA, and so you want to get back to the local community and contribute. So again, I have off-farm income that really provides for my family, and insurance is key as I grow a young family. So we do crop farming, and as William said, the dichotomy, we have nothing formal. There's nothing other than there is some land lease with family, and then I have about 9 other landowners that I have both written and unwritten leases with from a cropping standpoint. But I'm in southern Iowa, and we're diverse in cow-calf production, row crop production, a lot of hay ground. I'm still in a challenged situation because there's nothing formal with family succession whatsoever. Even though I can talk about this and I can dream for you and help you, I'm not one of those that's successful in getting that done. It'll be an aunts and uncle discussion after the senior producer is gone, unfortunately.
I think it gives a lot of credibility to your talks, you guys. And I've known Dr. Edwards for many years, and I've enjoyed his presentations and expertise.
Thank you.